Okay. Give people a couple minutes to join us in. Here's one person already. That's great.
Venetia, welcome. Donald. Okay, so our confusion.
Yes.
Confusing. Yeah.
Welcome everybody. Hi everyone. As you're joining, if you wouldn't mind, just to get the conversation started, and as you guys are participating in this, I'll introduce myself and Gary too. But just to get the conversation started, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and where you're calling in from in the chat, which you'll find along the bottom bar of your Zoom window. To get things started, my name is Nick Houle. I'm the Director of Client Engagement here at the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, and I'll be kind of running the MC role, if you will, today. Gary will be our main presenter, but I'll run any Q&A that we have in the chat or in the Q&A function, as well as inserting some useful links to things Gary's referencing, or if someone has a question, answering those to the best of my ability in the chat. We will pause, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 times or 3 times for questions?
Twice.
So we'll pause 2 times for questions. So if you have any questions as we are getting things rolling, feel free to drop those in the chat or the Q&A function at any time. You don't need to wait for those breaks. And then I will read some of those out, or all of them, depending on how things are going. Folks are chiming in now. Don is calling in from Winston-Salem in North Carolina. Welcome, Don. Craig from Oklahoma City. Millicent from Charleston, South Carolina. Hi, Millicent. Venetia from Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Welcome. We've done a lot of work in Miami-Dade in the past, and a lot of work in Florida in general, so welcome. Wendy from Cape Cod Community College in Massachusetts. Welcome, Wendy. We actually just had someone who is a facilitator at Cape Cod go through our training, I believe, in February. So that's great. Stephanie from Burlington, North Carolina. Welcome, Stephanie. Welcome. Okay, well, we'll give it another minute or so, Gary, you think, just to let any last stragglers join in, and then we can hit the ground running.
Sounds good, Nick.
Perfect.
And sorry if there was any confusion. We had a glitch in our system where we advertised this at 1 o'clock Eastern time, but set it up in our Zoom system for 2 o'clock Eastern time. And embarrassingly, Nick and I logged in at 1 o'clock, and surprise, surprise, no one showed up.
Yes. So thank you all for understanding what we meant by starting today at this time. And we're glad to have you with us. That's great.
And Michael Shields, who's with us now, joining us from Ireland, was caught up in the confusion and was the only one that logged in at the 1 o'clock Eastern time. But Michael's in Ireland right now, so it's 7 o'clock in the evening where you are, Michael.
So,
I think
5 hours difference this time of year.
Yep.
Okay, well, we're about 3 past the hour. So Gary, how about you take it away? I'm going to turn my camera off and mute, and I'll hop back in when there's some at the Q&A breaks.
Sounds good, Nick.
Real quick, I forgot to mention, we are recording this, as you likely heard when you joined the webinar. We will also be providing that recording as well as the chat. And the slides for today's presentation. So feel free to sit back, pay attention, take notes, but you feel free to just spend the time paying attention and being thoughtful about things, because we'll give you everything you need to remember the presentation after the fact.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. And thank you everyone for joining us. I would like to make this as interactive as possible. And, in these midsummer webinars, we generally have a little bit lower attendance, but we can take advantage of that and make this interactive. So please, feel free to start chiming in the comments section. If you have a question, if you have a comment, whatever, I'll pause once in the middle and then once again at the end to address these. But I welcome your input and your ideas in this webinar. So, what I want to share with you today is some of what we've learned about cultivating entrepreneurial mindsets. And this is a journey I've been on for a long time, more than 30 years now, trying to deconstruct the entrepreneurial mindset as the logical framework that can empower people. And that's basically how I think about it. I'm going to share with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got some slides to share. Let's see if I can make this work. Hold on a second here. Okay, let's see what just happened here. There we go. Now, if I can just get this to move out of the way so I can hit the play button. All right, good. There we go. All right, cultivating entrepreneurial mindsets in classrooms, organizations, and communities. That's what this webinar is all about. My name is Gary Schoeniger. I am the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We're the world's leading provider of entrepreneurial mindset education, training, professional, and organizational development. That's what we do. So some of the questions I've been trying to figure out, as I just said a minute ago, is what exactly is an entrepreneurial mindset? Why is it important? Why do we need to think that way? And then perhaps more importantly, how can we develop it not only in ourselves, but in others, our children, our students, our workforce, and our communities? These are some of the big questions I'll try to get at in this very brief webinar. So, COVID notwithstanding, we all know the world has changed in ways that now require everyone to be more innovative and entrepreneurial, to think like entrepreneurs. I don't mean that everyone should start a business. I mean that everyone needs to understand an entrepreneurial mindset as sort of as a life skill, let's say. Right? You think about the workforce is changing, like where the workforce is increasingly being treated as independent, on-demand workers rather than traditional employees, right? The middle class is shrinking while artificial intelligence and robotics are threatening to leave huge swaths of the population behind. I mean, these are some of the challenges that we're all facing. And these are some of the challenges that require us to be more innovative and entrepreneurial. Now, when we look at entrepreneurial people, what we see are people who are resilient and resourceful. They're self-directed. They're creative and critical thinkers who can identify and solve problems amidst complexity and change, right? These are people that know how to mobilize resources and make things happen regardless of their circumstances. And when we look at these so-called characteristics of entrepreneurial people, I sometimes just call them entrepreneurials as sort of like a millennial, we see that there's unlimited global demand for people who can think this way. They're essentially future-proof. And so that sort of begs the question is, where does this come from and how can we cultivate it in ourselves? So there's two important ideas that I'm trying to bring together here in more broadly speaking, in my work, in the work of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. The first is that a mindset as the underlying beliefs, assumptions, and mental models that influence our behavior without our awareness, right? That's a really, really important idea. And I'll get into that in a minute, right? We all have a mindset, yet very few of us are aware of it, much less the ways in which it influences our behavior. But the second big idea is the redefinition of entrepreneurship in a way that anyone can embrace, regardless of their circumstances or their chosen path. The current definitions of entrepreneurship have their roots at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. It makes this distinction between someone who organizes the business and someone who works in the business. And these changes that are happening in the world of work are making those differences almost irrelevant, right? All this is to say that it needs a new definition. It's out of date. The current definitions are not only out of date, but they're misleading and inaccurate. And I'll get into that in a minute. So let's start with the mindset, right? It took me a long time to figure this out, and I couldn't find a clinical definition of mindset. There was this sort of, Carol Dweck wrote the book Mindset, the New Psychology of Success, the fixed growth mindset. Many of you are familiar with that. Carol Dweck at Stanford defines mindset as a way of thinking, and it's just not enough for our work. And I finally found the understanding or the language around mindset in the description of culture in anthropology. And so the way to think about mindset is it works for an individual in the same way that culture works for a group. It's the underlying, often unspoken beliefs and assumptions and values that drive our behavior. So here's my definition of a mindset, which draws from Edgar Schein's definition of culture. A mindset is a pattern of values, beliefs, and assumptions learned by an individual that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore assumed to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel. It's a little bit clunky, but it's very accurate, and I'll get into more of that in a minute. So a mindset is a construct. I mean, it's not actually a node in the brain. But the purpose of a mindset is to enable us to think without thinking. And that's really the important underlying idea, right? Our brains are inundated with billions of bits of data that pour in through our five senses every second. And yet our brains are only able to process a very small 4 or 5 bits of data per second. So our brains need to filter everything, and they need to automate as much as possible to reduce cognitive load. That's the basic overall purpose of a mindset. It enables us to navigate life without really thinking too much. There's 2 important ideas nested in the mindset. And the first is that our mindset, I shouldn't say determines, maybe regulates is a better word, the output we get from the inherent capabilities we have. And I like to refer to this description that Warren Buffett uses. And he said, over here, you've got a guy with a 400 horsepower engine. And yet he only knows how to get 100 horsepower of output from that engine. And you got a guy over here who's got a 200 horsepower engine, but he knows how to get all 200 horsepower out of his engine. He's better off than the guy with the 400 horsepower engine, right? That's the real nugget in the mindset, right? And what we see in entrepreneurs is people of modest intellectual abilities, people who have no particular advantage over others are thriving. And it has a lot to do with their underlying beliefs. But the second aspect of a mindset that's also important is that our mindset tends to become a fixed way of thinking, hence the term mindset, that prevents us from adapting in times of change. And I'll talk about that a little bit as well. So here's how it works. And this is, again, borrowing from the models of understanding culture and anthropology, right? On the surface, we see the visible artifacts and the observable behaviors. Beneath the surface, we find the explicit knowledge and espoused values. This is what I know that I know, and I say that I value. But level 3 is where our mindset resides. This is where we find the deeply held, taken for granted values, beliefs, and assumptions of which we're not really aware, right? That is where the mindset resides. But the point is that what shows up on the surface is much less likely to be a result of level 2 explicit knowledge and espoused values. It's much more likely to be the result of our deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions. That's the big idea here, right? And so the connection to these deeply held values and assumptions to the output, the outcomes that we create. In our work, we look at 5 dimensions of a mindset. These are aspects of our thinking that we're not really aware of. One is perceived locus of control, right? A deeply held level 3 assumption about whether we're in control of our lives or whether fate, luck, powerful others, or circumstances control our lives, right? Now, we're not consciously aware of this, but we can see it in a person's behavior, right? So another aspect of the mindset that we look at is motivation. Are we intrinsically or extrinsically motivated? And that makes an enormous difference in our level of engagement, our ability to stick with tasks. There's all kinds of impact. And what we know from the literature is that people who are intrinsically motivated, whereby the task itself is the reward, tend to outperform people who are extrinsically motivated by power, prestige, monetary rewards, and letter grades. We look at the fixed growth orientation. Do I believe that my talent and abilities are fixed or finite, or do I believe that I can develop them through deliberate practice? This has an enormous impact on the goals we select for ourselves, yet we're not aware of it. Optimistic versus pessimistic explanatory style. This has to do with the story we tell ourselves. Is it optimistic, pessimistic? This has an enormous impact on resilience and our ability to persist in the face of difficulty and setbacks. And I think the big kahuna here is perceived self-efficacy, our underlying unconscious beliefs about our own ability to navigate life and set and accomplish the goals, our goals. So those are just some examples of some underlying beliefs, values, and assumptions that have an enormous impact on our behavior, yet we're probably not aware of. I've now interviewed more than 500 entrepreneurs all over the world, and what I hear in some form or another over and over and over again is this underlying, mostly unconscious assumption that it's up to me to figure out how to make myself useful to others. And by doing so, I can empower myself. Now, the entrepreneurs don't know what they know, so they're not usually consciously aware of this assumption. This took years of interviews and research to kind of tease out this core assumption. So now I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship and the redefining of entrepreneurship in a way that everyone can embrace and hopefully bring these 2 ideas together, right? So what does that word entrepreneur mean, right? It means that this word's got a lot of baggage attached to it. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You know, in many ways, the venture-backed high-tech entrepreneurs are looked upon as iconic figures. And yet they represent a very tiny, tiny fraction of the entrepreneurial activity. And so this creates a visibility versus representation issue that skews our thinking not only about how to be entrepreneurial, but about who can be entrepreneurial. Some people think of an entrepreneur as a small business owner, which I don't disagree with that. But the problem is the efforts to support small business ownership is very often conflates entrepreneurship with management. And people who come to these small business development initiatives wanting to start a business are very often treated as if their startup is simply a smaller version of a large corporation. And they're taught to do things that one might do as a manager of a large corporation. They're taught how to write business plans. They're taught how to do financial forecasting, to understand, these mechanical functions of operating a business. Yet, and these managerial functions are essential for managing a business with a known product, a proven product, and a known customer base. But they actually thwart the development of entrepreneurial attitudes and skills. And what I'm trying to say here is that the attitudes and skills required to discover opportunities are almost entirely distinct from the attitudes and skills required to exploit those opportunities. Now, of course, the former being entrepreneurial skills, the latter being managerial skills. We need them both. So it's not an either or conversation. It's a yes and conversation. And it's also important to bring up that there, for many, entrepreneurs are looked at with contempt, right? They're looked upon as people who will simply exploit others for their own gain. And look, I get it. There are plenty of reasons to think this way. And whether you think of an entrepreneur as a venture-backed high-tech entrepreneur, a small business owner, or a greedy bastard, there are good reasons for each of those perspectives, yet they don't accurately reflect the mindset, the motivation, and the methods of a typical entrepreneur. So without getting into it in a whole lot of detail, I finally landed on this definition of entrepreneurship after interviewing hundreds of entrepreneurs. And I've defined it now as the self-directed pursuit of opportunity to create value for others. And by creating value for others, we empower ourselves. Now, if you were to look up the term entrepreneurship in the dictionary or online, whatever, Google search that term, hopefully one day you'll see this definition. But what you're likely to find is someone who operates and organizes a business. That definition is exactly the same as it was in the 17th century, 18th century, when the term was first coined, right? The other definition you're likely to see is someone who takes a risk in exchange for a profit. And I hope to demonstrate to you today that that is also very misleading, that entrepreneurs are not necessarily, these everyday entrepreneurs at least, are not necessarily motivated by profit. And we don't have time to get into a lot of the humanistic ideals that drive this theory, but they're definitely not necessarily profit-oriented. There's a purpose-driven component to the work. All this is to say is that entrepreneurial skills are 21st century skills. These are the skills employers demand. These are the skills the world now demands. And yet, in many ways, these are the skills that our parenting styles, our systems of education, our managerial structures tend to inhibit the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. And that's what we're trying to reconcile, that we have to create new methods of teaching and learning that are designed specifically to cultivate entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. So now I'm going to try to put this all together, and then I'll get a little bit into the Ice House on how our program, the Ice House program, actually works. So, one thing that's really struck me from observing entrepreneurs is, for the most part, they're not always the straight A students. They're mediocre students, yet they seem to be learning all the time. They're learning machines. And what you'll see is that the opportunity discovery process, the entrepreneurial process, creates a very powerful incentive to learn. And what's happening is the locus of control is shifting, and that's what creates this incentive for learning. And it works like this, right? The current reality, and this is adapted from the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who's one of the fathers of positive psychology, is the author of a book called Flow. And what he talks about is that the compelling goal acts upon an individual in a way that optimizes engagement. It's a really, really important point, right? When we're pursuing something where the challenge exceeds our skill, we become very anxious and it's very difficult to function, right? This is what psychologists would call high arousal. Conversely, when we're in a situation where our skill exceeds the challenge, we become bored and disengaged. Now, interestingly, what data from Gallup and others show is that the vast majority of students leave high school not engaged in learning. We also see that the vast majority of workers are not engaged in their work. But when we look at entrepreneurial people, they seem to be optimally engaged. And they are optimally engaged not because of their dispositional traits, but because of the compelling nature of the goal they're pursuing. Now, I'll ask you a rhetorical question, which is this: do you have a compelling goal? Do you have something you wake up every day thinking about, striving towards, right? And if the answer is no, you should ask yourself, why not? Because I think the difference between an entrepreneur and a non-entrepreneur comes down to whether or not they have a compelling goal. I mean, I think it's really that simple. So as a result of pursuing a compelling goal, what we see in entrepreneurs is an internal locus of control, a deeply held assumption that I'm in control of my own fate. We see people who are intrinsically motivated. They're not just motivated by money. There's a purpose-driven component to their work. Let's not forget that the desire to fulfill human needs through our own effort is among the most powerful motivational factors there is. We see a growth orientation, an underlying assumption that I can teach myself whatever I need to learn in order to get where I need to go. What we also see is a tendency towards an optimistic explanatory style. The positive nature of the goal, the hopefulness is increased because of the compelling nature of the goal. And what we ultimately see is an increased sense of self-efficacy, right? A deeply held belief that I can achieve my desired goals. Now, here's the rub. The entrepreneurial mindset is not the cause of the behavior. It is an effect. I'm going to say that again because it's probably the most important thing I can say in this webinar. The entrepreneurial mindset is an effect of the entrepreneurial process. It's not the cause. The cause of entrepreneurial behavior it lies in our humanistic tendency towards self-actualization. When you look at an entrepreneur, all you're really seeing is a human organism trying to self-actualize. So, okay, I'm going to pause now. I'm going to take a breath, and hopefully we've got some questions in the chat. I don't see any there. Maybe someone will pop up with a question or a comment. I'm just going to use this opportunity to see if you guys have any questions. Does that change the way you think about entrepreneurship? Does it validate the way you think about it? Do you have any pushback against any of the ideas? If so, I would definitely love to hear it.
Yeah, we'll just give you all a minute or two to formulate any questions. Oh, here comes one in the Q&A. This is a great analysis of key underlying aspects of entrepreneurial mindset, but these appear to be innate. How does one acquire these?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And one acquires these in the pursuit of the compelling goal. That's really it. They're not innate. And that's what you're referring to is what psychologists refer to as the fundamental attribution error. And so the fundamental attribution error is essentially this. It's the tendency to overemphasize the importance of personality traits when explaining a person's behavior and ignoring all the cognitive, motivational, and situational factors that are acting upon that individual. That's the fundamental attribution error. And we make that error all the time. We look at someone and we attribute their behavior to who they are, and we don't take into consideration the situational influence.
And we'll talk as we go through the remainder of the presentation a little bit about other ways you can participate in kind of deliberate practice of these concepts to, again, bolster them. They are at some level skills that you need to practice. It's not achieving the mindset and then forgetting about it. You have to be actively working towards it.
Right. And here's another interesting little point I want to throw in to pile on this question. I wasn't smart enough to keep track of this, but a significant number of the people that I've interviewed, the entrepreneurs, have confessed to me that they never really thought of themselves as entrepreneurs, at least when they began. And that's also interesting. So that's why I'm saying, we have to stop thinking about entrepreneurship as a binary thing. You're either going to own and operate a business or you're going to be an employee. We have to stop thinking about it that way. We have to look beyond startup. We have to start talking about entrepreneurship in a way that everyone can embrace. A lot of kids will say, what do I need to take an entrepreneurship class for? I'm going to be a nursing student, or I'm going to be, whatever. It's like, these are the skills the world now demands, regardless of your charted path, regardless of where you start.
We just received two good questions, one somewhat related to the previous question, so I'll start there. Are the compelling goals associated with global goals for sustainable development?
They can be, and I like that question, but I want to put an asterisk next to it, because a lot of times, particularly in colleges and universities, students come to the entrepreneurship space wanting to change the world. And that's great. But very often they're going to do that. They're going to try to do that in a way that is maybe undermines their ability to succeed, right? So, we have students, in our programs all the time. Well, I want to cure homelessness. Okay, homelessness is a big problem with, many different contributing factors. So maybe you want to, cure homelessness in one particular neighborhood or for one particular population. And so I applaud the big ideas, but we also have to be able to start where we are and we use what we have and start to make an impact on a local level. I mean, it's like the idea is to think globally, but act locally, I think, is another way to answer that question.
Definitely. Do you think we have time for one more question this round before we pick back up?
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Donald is asking, and by the way, that previous question was from Michael. Thank you, Michael. And the question before that was from C. Shemaski. Thank you, both of you. Donald is asking, how do we break the long-held perception that entrepreneurship is about starting a business?
Donald, that's the bane of my existence right there. That's the question I don't really, just pounding away. I'm working on a new book to try to help people understand this. We are making some headway. We've got some colleges and universities, even public schools, that are using our program more broadly beyond the business, the realm of business or startup. And look, don't get me wrong. Our programs, our methodology is very, very effective for people who want to start businesses. I just think it's important that we have to expand this. We have to think beyond this. As a matter of fact, our team is working now to create badging so that people who complete the Ice House Entrepreneurship Programs can put that on their resume, that employers can see that I have a basic comprehension in entrepreneurial mindset competencies. So I don't really have a clear answer for you, Donald. I appreciate the question, but
I'll post a link to our page about badging in the chat actually right now. That's a great point, Gary.
Yeah. I've also published a paper called The Entrepreneurial Mindset Imperative, which maybe Nick could also link to here. And it's, for a leadership level understanding, like why students and workers all need to develop an entrepreneurial mindset. Yeah, Donald, I feel it. But Donald, if not us, then who? Right? I mean, that's the work we're doing, and it's not going to be overnight. But we got to be the little tugboats that are turning the big ship around. And I thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. And I know we're running short on time, but I am going to read out one more question because it relates more to the section we just completed. So I'd like to keep it tied in there. This is from C again. The aspects you described appear to be fundamentally an underlying belief system within a person, which explains why entrepreneurs are self-motivated, self-directed, etc. But it seems to reinforce the nature-nurture argument about entrepreneurship, which stops individuals from moving into this area. It seems you're saying that this can be changed.
I am saying this. Here's what I'm saying, see. Non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. That not everyone wants to start a business per se, but we are all innately curious, creative, right? We all want to be engaged in work that matters. We all have a very strong desire to contribute. In fact, the three key ingredients for optimal engagement are autonomy, competency, and relatedness. This is another way of saying autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Right? And those are the three key ingredients to optimize engagement. Now, going back to what I said a moment ago, non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. We're all born with this curiosity, this innate tendency to want to contribute, and the tendency towards self-actualization. Now, those tendencies can be easily thwarted. And I could go on for the next 3 or 4 hours about the ways in which overbearing parenting, the ways in which other directed, routinized learning and work environments systematically inhibit the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. And this is something I've written about extensively in my new book, that we're essentially so steeped in a managerial paradigm. And if you think about a managerial paradigm, what are the level 3 values and assumptions of a managerial paradigm? They're about the efficient replication and distribution of known things. And so this managerial paradigm is not conducive to the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. The managerial paradigm won't tolerate, or is not likely to tolerate, curiosity, exploration, and those kinds of skills. And what I'm saying is that we need both, but we need to understand the ways in which the environment influences behavior. It's very, very difficult to develop entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills within a managerial culture. And as Tony Wagner has famously said, thus far we're creating innovators and entrepreneurs by accident rather than by design. So thank you for that wonderful comment observation, C.
Yes, absolutely. All right,
And
looking at time.
let me
Go ahead,
roll on.
sorry. Yep.
Okay, so thank you, Nick. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Ice House program, and this is sort of our solution. You don't have to use our solution. This is our solution. It's called the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. In 2008, I was doing a research project for the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute, and I had the chance to interview hundreds of entrepreneurs. Let me back up. One thing Cisco asked me to do was to do a gap analysis on the entrepreneurship education ecosystem in North America. And we quickly found that the way that entrepreneurship is typically portrayed in a classroom is largely divorced from the day-to-day reality of a typical entrepreneur. And Cisco gave me this platform to go out and do some research. What are typical entrepreneurs actually doing? And one such entrepreneur was Clifton Talbert, who shared with me the influence of his uncle Cleve as he came of age in the Mississippi Delta in the height of legal segregation in the 1940s and 1950s. And that became the inspiration. Clifton and I co-authored this book, Who Owns the Ice House? 8 Life Lessons from an Unlikely Entrepreneur, which are essentially these 8 core competencies we distilled from hundreds and hundreds of interviews. They're told through a single story. Then 2010, with the Kauffman Foundation gave us a program related investment, initial investment to develop the Ice House Entrepreneurship Programs, which have now gone all over the world. I'm going to tell you very briefly how the Ice House program works. 5 things. Start by redefining entrepreneurship in a way that anyone can embrace. I just had a chat with an entrepreneur yesterday who's going to be on my podcast, the Entrepreneurial Mindset Project. And he said he and a few of his friends took an entrepreneurship course in college, and they came away thinking, this isn't for me. I'm not that guy. And now they're both, he and one of his friends are both very successful entrepreneurs. And he was saying the way they characterized it really didn't match the reality. The second thing is to introduce the 8 core competencies that we distilled from these interviews. Immerse the learner in the opportunity discovery process. It is the entrepreneurial process. Expose them to relatable social models. It's really part of our secret sauce. Stop talking about Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and expose students to people that they can relate to. That's the best way to get them to adopt a new behavior. And lastly, encourage personal reflection so they can connect the mindset to the outcomes they're creating. So the redefining of entrepreneurship, we already talked about that. It's the self-directed pursuit of opportunity to create value for others. Anyone can embrace that definition regardless of their circumstances. It doesn't require you to be a genius. You don't have to have money. You don't have to be a creative type. You can embrace that definition if you're working at a minimum wage job or if you want to change the world, anything in between. Introduce these 8 core competencies. I'm going to go through them very quickly here. It begins with the power to choose. What's the compelling goal? And what we now know is that goal acts upon the individual in a very compelling way. Entrepreneurs tend to see problems as opportunities. And this is nested in the underlying assumption that by becoming useful to others, I can empower myself. They tend to be action-oriented. They're trying lots of little things. They're not writing business plans. They're micro-experimenting. For the vast majority of entrepreneurs, the data don't exist. And what they're basically doing is trying, they're learning by doing. It's an error-based learning process that is found everywhere in nature, except it's absent in most of formal education. As I said earlier, they seem to be voracious learners, but they're not necessarily learning from traditional methods. They're engaged in informal and non-formal learning methods. They're very resourceful. They learn how to start where they are and use what they have. It's interesting to me, but I've come to see the ways in which the lack of resources actually works to the advantage of the nascent entrepreneur. If you want to ask me more about that in the questions, I'm happy to talk about it. They become very reliable. They understand that by solving problems for others, I can empower myself. So they intuitively understand that being reliable and focusing on the other empowers the self. They tend to immerse themselves in their own learning communities, and they tend to persist. And we now know that that persistence comes from an optimistic, explanatory style. We then immerse them in the process using what we call the Ice House Opportunity Discovery Canvas, which we modified Alexander Osterwalder's business model canvas to take some of the businessy vernacular out of it. But it basically breaks the discovery process into 3 phases. There's a problem finding process that requires exploration and inquiry. There's a problem solving process that requires experimentation and adaptation. And then there's the 3rd phase, which is about execution, and that's the advocacy and implementation of the ideas. And so what we encourage the students to do is to iterate through this problem finding, problem solving phase in search of evidence of usefulness. My point here is that the entrepreneurial discovery process is an evidence-based process. It's not gambling. It's not fortune telling. It's basically, when you break it down, the entrepreneurs are following the scientific method. They're experimenting until they find something that works, and then they start to execute. We have a lot more information about this on our website. But back to my assertion of the scientific method. It's the background research and the hypothesis formation and experimentation. Once there's evidence of usefulness, you then replicate and communicate your findings to others. That's basically it. I'm really going over this in a very high level. There's so much more to this, but I'm just trying to keep it very simple for the purpose of this webinar. We then expose them to a pretty wide variety of relatable social models. And here's some examples here just to show you. They're learning from a diverse range of people who come from all manner of adversity and challenging backgrounds, yet they somehow manage to succeed. And lastly, we encourage personal reflection, and this is really the hidden gem of the whole program. We encourage students to come back and reflect and to realize that a mindset is a belief system. And it's a belief system that is perfectly designed to create the outcomes that it's creating, right? So we're currently asking the students to journal and reflect. How are you currently contributing to circumstances you say you don't want, right? That's the real power of understanding the mindset, right? So that's it in a nutshell. Since we launched in 2010 at the Kauffman Foundation, the program has gone all over the world, has been recognized by the United Nations, by the European Commission, the Papal Council for Peace and Justice. It's taken off in ways we could have never imagined. We've now got approximately 3,100 facilitators trained on 5 continents. It's being used in community colleges, which had a phenomenal impact on student persistence. There are now 4 different versions, by the way. I should have put that slide earlier. There's the original edition, a student success edition that's been really impactful. That's the slide I just showed you, to help students persist. There's a small business edition. We've also developed a middle school edition after a very successful pilot with about 1,000 students in Erie, Pennsylvania. Impact on high school students. This is a giant system in Mexico, Prepa Tech. They have about 31 campuses across Mexico. Approximately 15,000 students have been through the Ice House program with just astonishing results. Here's one of the testimonials from the Erie, Pennsylvania. This is from the, out of the mouths of a 13-year-old girl. If we can think about how we can change problems into opportunities, we can make Erie a better place. I mean, that's really, what I said earlier, the desire to contribute is a powerful motivational force. Another aspect of the program in workforce development, organizational culture. The city of Albuquerque is now taking thousands of city government workers through our Ice House program, and the results there have been absolutely phenomenal. They made videos about it. There's all kinds of case study on our website. You can learn more about that there. Creating entrepreneurial communities. There are small nonprofits using our curriculum and our training to cultivate entrepreneurial communities and ecosystem building is what a lot of folks say. One such undertaking is led by Tom Rue, who is the former VP of entrepreneurship at Kauffman. He's now leading this effort in North Carolina at NC IDEA, where they've put approximately 200 facilitators, middle school, high school, college, university, nonprofit leaders through the Ice House training. They've also purchased 100,000 user licenses that they're distributing for free across the state of North Carolina. And those of you, I know we have some folks on from North Carolina. If you want to know more about that, we're happy to connect on that front. So, okay, that's it. I'm going to wrap up, leave a little more time for questions here. In addition to the Ice House program, we offer professional development keynotes, workshops, and training programs for organizations all over the world. I just got back from speaking at the end of March. I was able to speak at the Global Entrepreneurship Conference in Riyadh. So that's another part of what we do. If you want to, oops, I forgot to change this slide. Nick, you'll help me out here. We have 4 public facilitator trainings every year. And our next one, I'm not sure when it is, Nick, October?
Over the month of November. Mm-hmm.
It's in November. Okay, you can sign up for that. I apologize for not changing the slide. As you can see, we've just started our July cohort. But we also do on-site facilitator training. So, for colleges, university organizations as well. So you don't have to wait around. If you want to do 10 or more people, we can come to you to do that training as well. So that's it, Nick. I'm going to stop with the slides and let's see if we have some questions or comments we can address.
Yep. One thing I wanted to note, we do have early bird pricing now for our November training cohort. So if you're at all interested in attending that training, be sure to register before September, as I believe it's closing in the middle of September, that early bird pricing. So just to put that out for everyone. And that was the last link I just shared in the chat as well. Gary, are you able to hear me?
Sorry, Nick, I got to change my speaker here. My earbuds just died on me. Give me 1 second. All right, I think I'm good, Nick.
All right, can you hear me okay?
I can, yep, thank you.
Great, great. Okay, we do have one question. We actually have 2 questions. The first one's kind of a fun one. Would you regard your first meeting with Clifton Talbert as a lucky accident or indeed a major discovery?
Can I answer like yes and
exactly.
yes?
Yes. Well, I thought that was an interesting opportunity to talk about, from the outsider's perspective, it sure looks like luck, but you are out there creating your own luck, as it were, in a sense,
That's
right?
an important point, Nick. I mean, it's just to the casual observer, everything looks like luck, but it's not random, right? You're out there and trying lots of things, most of which are not working.
Mm-hmm.
But every once in a while something works, and then people just ascribe that to luck. And I'm not sure it's luck. It's planned, there's more to it than just random luck. But with that said, 5 minutes into that interview, the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. And at the time, Clifton gave me a framework to say something that I was struggling to say. And I was trying to demonstrate that entrepreneurship is not just relegated to the, elite students at elite universities. That there's a fundamental underlying logic that transcends time, socioeconomics, culture, gender. And it's this simple underlying logic that anyone can embrace. So that's really what was my good fortune.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Stephanie's asking, or is saying, it strikes me that society would benefit the most if school-age children were exposed to this training / way of thinking early and often.
Okay, so that's part of what I'm trying to do in my new book, Stephanie. So I really appreciate that comment. So I said earlier that the way a mindset works is like this. This is a good opportunity. So the way a mindset works is like you learn something, and once your brain assumes that that's the correct way. So let's say you start a new job in a new city, and your first day to work, you got to figure out how to get there. And you got to look at your map on your phone and you navigate your way to work. And then by the third or fourth day, you don't have to think about it too much. By the end of the first month, you can drive to work, talk to your friend on the phone the entire way and not even remember how you got there. So once our brains accept something as the correct schema, let's say, our brains then relegate that schema to level 3. Our brains automate it in order to reduce the cognitive load. Does that make sense? That's how a mindset works. It enables us to think without thinking. Culture functions, well, let me back up. The peculiar thing about mindset is this. Here's the bug in the mindset. Once our brains relegate a particular schema to habitual control, our brains aren't very good at recognizing when that schema is no longer effective. Okay, now what I'm saying is that very same thing happens on a cultural level. Our systems of education are now so deeply ingrained in this particular way of thinking that it's very difficult to recognize the ways in which they are systematically inhibiting these very essential skills. So that's part of the conundrum and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, it's so complicated because I'll put it this way. If you wanted to design a system that would assure that to systematically squash the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills, I can think of no better mechanism than routinized, other directed learning processes. What happens is that after 16 or 20 or 12 or whatever years of formal education, without realizing it, many of us come to assume that someone else will tell us what we need to learn and do in order to be successful in life. And once that happens, In the past, that was okay. That worked. It no longer works. And regardless of your position, you've got to figure out how to make yourself more useful to more humans.
And unfortunately, we do have a hard stop. So I do appreciate everyone else who chimed in. Donald asked a question about the use of the program in the military, and Venetia said, being in the education field, there has to be some sort of buy-in for the teachers to even implement a program, likely with this fidelity. And that's absolutely true, Venetia. We have seen that if you don't have buy-in from the teachers, it isn't going to happen. So if you're trying for a top-down methodology, it likely won't work. But the potential of having top-down and bottom-up, that seems to be kind of the secret to bring this to the fore.
But and piling on there, Nick, like that's what we do better than anybody in the world. We train teachers. We get teacher buy-in. And that's exactly what our training program is about. So thank you for that comment.
Yep. Well, everyone, thank you so much. The recording will be available within 24 hours of right now, as long as the chat, the slides, and a couple other helpful links. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone.